Okay. So it's getting everything set up. So I'm just going to wait a few minutes to check that everyone who wants to join live can join live. If you're joining live, say hi. And if you're catching this as a replay, you can hashtag replay in the comments. And like with all the lives, you guys are welcome to interact, to make comments, to share your experiences. And yeah, it's great for us to see each other's experiences with these things as well. So yeah, feel free to do that, ask questions. If I don't know the answer at the time, I will look it up for you. Okay. I ended up moving the time of the slide because I was supposed to do a 40-kilometer training run today. And I was like, I'm not sure if I'm going to be back on time. So I just shifted an hour later. I was back way on time, not because I'm faster than I thought I was, but because I ended up only doing 30 kilometers. I was dying and my knees were not happy. And I have an event coming up at the end of June, doing a 50K trail run. So I was thinking, do not want knee injuries before I run that. So I came home early and made it on time. Yeah. Okay. Just gonna wait 1 or 2 more minutes. I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself. So long to those of you who don't know me. I'm Sarah. I am a sleep, stress management and recovery coach. So I generally help with things like burnout, chronic stress, exhaustion, feeling overwhelmed. And I specifically love helping female clinicians in these areas because I think it is so important and so neglected. Okay. So the topic we're going to dive into today is around sleep. So we all kind of have a sense of the benefits of sleep, and I'm not going to go too much into that. But when I'm working with clinicians, as I often say, we are mental. Just combining words here. We are mental and emotional athletes. And so sleep is one of those things that helps with all of that. It helps with every single area of our sleep. And it really is like one of those things where it's often something that I start with in coaching with someone because it is an area that, it just has such wide-ranging effects on everything else. And especially when we are exhausted and overwhelmed and stressed out, improving our sleep can be so important for helping us kind of recover and slowly start to feel better, slowly start to get our energy back, our enthusiasm back. Sorry, my voice. Probably all the heavy breathing and running. Okay, so we're going to essentially go through three categories. And these categories are essentially where you can look at if you're trying to diagnose, like, why am I not sleeping that well? Or where you're just trying to look at where can I improve my sleep. So these are kind of the main categories that people tend to struggle with, or the main areas that tend to affect our sleep the most. But of course, there are so many other areas we can look at. I'm also not going to be going into things like supplements and eating specifically for our sleep, various disorders, other problems, etc. So there is so much with sleep, but we're just going to go into the three main things. And then I also just wanted to say, like, for the new moms on this group, I know a lot of the stuff is going to be like, okay, sure, I'll try that. And I know you just kind of in the beginning just have to do what you can, and that's perfect. I'm hoping that a few of these things can still be helpful to you anyway, and you can kind of use a little bit of certain things that are possible to implement in this initial stage. Okay, cool. So we're going to dive into that. And I just want to start with a little bit of a reflection first, or a scale from you guys, a bit of feedback from you guys. Again, you can type this in the comments, you can DM me with this, you can just write it on a piece of paper for yourself. But on a scale of 1 being terrible and 10 being amazing, how would you rate your own quality of sleep, just on average? Obviously, there's days that are better and worse, but on average, how would you rate your overall sleep quality? Okay, so hopefully you have a number. Again, like I sometimes say, if it helps you to kind of write out a little caveat or a little comment on it, sometimes we struggle to pick a number because we're like, oh, but it's this, and sometimes it's this, or it's this, but, or it's this, and. So you're welcome to just pick a number and then write your little caveat next to it. Okay, and then just keep that number in mind. One of the things that I want to just touch on first is this idea that we actually often rate our sleep as being worse than it is, and getting less sleep than we actually are sleeping. And the reason for that is we often think that we often don't realize that we are sleeping when we're actually sleeping. And we often, apparently, especially women, often think that our sleep is worse than it is, often because we have these like idealistic and perfectionistic standards of what our sleep needs to be like, or what we have to do in order to get perfect sleep. And then we worry if that isn't perfect, then we're like, no, our sleep is not going to be great. So we rate it worse than it is, and we often don't realize that we are sleeping even when we are. If you've ever had the scary experience of being extremely sleep deprived and driving or something, or hopefully do that, but we'll have an experience like once in a while, or you're doing something, or you are trying not to sleep, and you actually fall asleep without even realizing it, and you have this like jerk when you wake up. And we have these little like micro sleeps all the time, even sometimes when we don't realize we're doing it. So they have this experiment where they have drivers who are very sleep deprived, and they monitored them, and they had to report when they thought they had like nodded off. And it often happened when they did realize that they nodded off, it was like a big micro sleep. But the tiny little micro sleeps, they weren't even realizing that their brain was taking. And so this is what I want to just emphasize, is that our brain and our body needs sleep. And that's not something to make you more perfectionistic. It's actually something to say it is a core biological drive. So even when you don't think you are sleeping, or even if you feel like you can't fall asleep, the body will take sleep because it needs it. So it will take care of the fact that it needs to sleep, even if you don't realize it. So we almost want to have a little bit of like relaxing into allowing the body to just take what it needs in terms of rest, instead of trying to control it, instead of trying to make it perfect, because it's kind of like when you're really trying to be funny. Like when people really try hard to be funny, the less they are less funny. So it's the same thing with our sleep. The harder we try, the more kind of anxious we get, the more perfectionistic we get. We actually have less good sleep as a result of that. So we want to be focusing on the behaviors around our sleep as much as possible. And then once we've set that up as best as we can for that specific day, we just allow the body to take the rest that it needs. We cannot actually control the quality of our sleep. So if we are saying, I need to get better sleep, I need to get better sleep, that is not a behavior. So we can't actually do that action. So we're actually making things harder for ourselves by not focusing on the actual behaviors and setting ourselves up for as good sleep as we can. And then the second part of that is being accepting and allowing of what the body needs. Because the more we are, as I said, kind of like anxious or trying hard to sleep, or we all know how that goes, right? It really doesn't work. And the thing is, if we had to rate our sleep poorly, let's say we think that we slept worse than we did, that wouldn't necessarily be a problem, except that they've seen that our performance then actually matches however we thought that our sleep was and how we feel the next day. So how you feel and function in the next day was based on how you thought you slept. And how you thought you slept was worse than you actually slept. So we just want to be aware of that bias in our minds. And part of that allowing is not being anxious about what it's going to mean for your next day. So realizing that your body will have gotten the sleep that it needs, and it's not the end of the world if you didn't get enough sleep last night. You're not going to, be completely useless that day, or, die of an early death because last night wasn't a great night of sleep. So we want to remove that anxiety around poor quality sleep as well. So we tend to end up kind of in these cycles of being worried about our sleep, trying to be too perfectionistic about our sleep, and then that affects the quality of our sleep. We have less good quality sleep, and then it just kind of keeps cycling like that. So as I said, we want to focus on the behaviors themselves and not focus on, oh, I need to get better sleep, I need to get more sleep, etc. Okay. So kind of leading on from that is the first category of where we tend to struggle with sleep. And I'm leading with that because it's something that a lot of us struggle with, but also it kind of sets the scene for the rest of them as well. So kind of like I said, that anxiety, a similar kind of concept is cognitive arousal. So thinking of anything that's making you high alert, or that your brain is very active, you're not going to be in the zone to kind of be sleeping and resting. If you think of evolution, we would not be, if we perceived there was a threat, we would not be focusing on getting more sleep. We would be focused on being vigilant for that threat. So anything that is alerting your stress response, alerting your threat response, is not going to be conducive for sleep. And I think a lot of us get very anxious, not only about our sleep, but just in general. And then we tend to be lying at night, ruminating about something or being anxious about something. So this is the first kind of category of where we tend to struggle with our sleep and where we can look at improving our sleep. The second one is the buildup and breakdown of adenosine. So adenosine essentially builds up the longer that you've been awake, in the same do you call that? What's the word? Anyway, linearly, I guess. The longer you've been awake, the more it builds up. And then when you sleep, it goes down at the same rate. So essentially, when you have enough adenosine built up, that's one of the primary drivers or kind of pressures to be sleepy or want to sleep. And then when you're sleeping and adenosine lowers to a certain point, that's then a drive to wake up. So we'll go into kind of like how to affect these things, but just think of that as a molecule that's building up the longer you awake and then is being broken down the longer you're asleep. And then the third one is our circadian rhythm. So our circadian rhythm is not exactly 24 hours. It relies on our biological cues of light, of temperature, of movement, etc., to essentially tell it, because it's in the nucleus in the brain, it's dark, it doesn't know what's going on. It relies on our cues to let it know exactly what the time of day is, because if it knows what time of the day is, it knows when should it be alert and awake and energized, and when should it be getting ready for sleep. So we are essentially telling the brain when to be alert and awake and when to be sleepy and calm. So those are the three. So it's anxiety or like cognitive arousal, adenosine buildup and breakdown, and our circadian rhythm. And you can just start commenting any of these that kind of, I feel like, okay, this might be the area that I'm struggling the most in, or where I have maybe the most opportunity to improve. So then we want to look at taking an action step. So we want to think about that number that you had for your sleep quality. And we want to say, okay, like let's take whatever your number was, whatever you rated it. So let's say a 6. How could we get that number just one number higher? So if you rated it a 6 and now you're rating it a 7, what could you have done to have rated it now a 7? And we want to go through possible action steps that for each of these categories that may bring your number just one higher. Remember, we're not just trying to increase your sleep quality, because what does that mean? And how do you do that, right? We want to choose an action step, a behavior that is going to help then bring that quality up a little bit higher. And just also noticing that tendency to want to, if it's a 6, saying, I need it to be a 10, right? We're just trying to get it just a little bit better, and that's how we build up. So in the first category, in the cognitive arousal or anxiety, there can be different ways to address this. So one of the ideas is a kind of refocusing. So we want to, when we're lying in bed, have a way to refocus our attention on something else. If we are ruminating about something, if there's thoughts that keep looping, we want a way to kind of shift our attention to something else. We want to be, for example, doing something that is maybe calming us down, but is still engaging our attention. So maybe we're reading a book, or maybe we just have kind of like a visualization in our minds. I like to sometimes think about it's like a stress relief tool, but when I'm thinking about something and I'm ruminating, I'm kind of very zoned in, and then I try and kind of think of like a bigger view. So my actual view, whether my eyes are closed or open doesn't matter, but my view is kind of opening, and then things like thoughts and ideas and stuff, they just kind of like float around there. So they like come and they go, but they're not like, I'm not zoning in on them. I'm not like following that little story to somewhere. And we often have to keep doing that because our brain latches onto that story again. So something that's going to kind of refocus your brain on something else. The one way you can also, if you are finding that something is on your mind, you can either at that time write something down, kind of have a little notepad next to your bed or something, or you could actually have a routine where before you go into bed, you're just writing a few notes. It doesn't have to be like this long journaling process. If that works for you, amazing. But if you just want to kind of write down a few things, like these are the main things that happen in the day, this is what I'm likely to be kind of thinking about, looping on, this is what's going to happen tomorrow, just having some notes so that your brain feels like, okay, we've dealt with this to some extent, we've been there. Because when we're ruminating, your brain is trying to like have that safety of we've gone through this, we've prepared, we have like some sort of armor against this future threat. Another thing that can be very helpful is not being able to see your clock. So people often, when they wake up, look at the time, and then you start being anxious about how much time you have left, and you to sleep, and then you start like doing those little calculations. If I sleep now, I'll have this many hours, etc., etc. So it can be very helpful to not have any visible, like digital clock face or something, or even any type of clock face where you can see the time from where you are in your bed. So not kind of being focused on the clock, and then restructuring. So a similar thing to what I was talking about earlier is like we get into this loop where we're lying in bed and we are supposed to be going to sleep, and we are anxious now because we're not falling asleep. And then we just kind of cycle in this loop. So we want to be thinking about those kind of mindset shifts around sleep of, I'm just gonna, kind of lie here and get rest. Even if I'm not sleeping, I can still be deeply resting. My body will take the rest that it needs. I will fall asleep when I do. However much sleep I get today, it's not going to significantly affect my day tomorrow. It's okay to have, a night or a few nights that are not great, or things like the sleep is not ideal, or not being able to fall asleep is not ideal, but it's good enough. So anything that's kind of reminding you of those reframing thoughts that can help you just not have that anxiety around not being able to sleep. And then the second category, adenosine, the main two things are consistent timing of sleep. So if you think about that kind of building up as long as you've been asleep, if you stay in bed too late, or if you wake up later than usual, let's say, then by the time you go into your normal bedtime, adenosine hasn't built up to the extent that it's giving you a very high sleep pressure. So if you have a very consistent wake and sleep time, then it builds up and breaks down at a kind of consistent, in a consistent period of time. So that can be very helpful, having a consistent sleep-wake schedule, even on the weekends. Again, this doesn't have to be perfect with all of these. If anything just makes you more anxious about your sleep, or makes you more kind of perfectionistic, like I have to have all these like ideal things in place, otherwise I'm not going to have good sleep at all. If it makes you more like perfectionistic about it, throw it out the window. It's not useful for you right now. But these are all just kind of ideas. So again, it doesn't have to be perfect, like to the minutes or whatever. I try and stay within kind of half an hour, my sleep and wake times. Generally, my going to sleep time is very consistent, and then my waking up time will sometimes change by about half an hour, depending on whether it's week or weekend. Sometimes it's an hour, but usually it's quite sort of in that space. An hour can also be perfectly fine, but you want to just kind of be in that ballpark of getting a bit of consistency, because that also tends to cycle, right? We wake up later, and then because we're not sleepy enough, we go to bed later, and then it just kind of, or we try and make up for the fact that we wake up later. It can all kind of become a bit of a cycle. So that's something to consider. And then another thing that affects adenosine quite a lot is caffeine intake. And I'm not going to tell you to give up your coffee, don't worry. I love my coffee. But yeah, so thinking of that, the caffeine basically blocks the receptors for adenosine. So you still have that buildup of adenosine. It doesn't block the production of adenosine. The adenosine is still building up, but your receptors are basically taken up by adenosine. So as soon as adenosine, sorry, other way around, by caffeine. So as soon as the caffeine wears off, that's often why we get a bit of a crash. So that adenosine, I'm making up these words. When the caffeine has worn off, then we're suddenly aware of like how much adenosine we have. And because it was always there, it was just being kind of like, it was like a little door saying like, we can't see this. And then suddenly all that adenosine is present and we're aware of it and we have this like intense sleepiness. So if we are having caffeine, we are essentially blocking that effect of adenosine, and caffeine can take quite a while. I think it's a 6-hour half-life, if I'm remembering that number correctly. So you want to aim for like around about 10 hours before you go to sleep, having your last cup of coffee, but try and aim for at least 6 hours. So earlier in the day, we want to be having a coffee or a caffeine, in whatever form you have caffeine, if you do, and then trying to stay away from it later on in the day. And just a note on that, some people are very resistant to the effects of caffeine. That was not a very good way to say it. Some people don't feel the effects of caffeine very strongly. So we don't have that like waking up that we don't feel more energized or whatever from the caffeine, but then we also don't have the kind of crashing or the effect on our sleep. Other people are very sensitive to the effects of caffeine, so you can also kind of play with what is right for you, of course. And there is also a bit of evidence to show that even when you are not that sensitive to caffeine and you don't feel like it affects your sleep, we should still be trying to have it quite a long time before we go to sleep, because sometimes it affects it in a way that we can't necessarily feel. But again, that might not be the priority if you are not that sensitive to caffeine. And then the last category of circadian rhythm, again, it comes back to consistent timing. But the main cue for our circadian rhythm is going to be light. Light is one of the most powerful cues. And sunshine, even if it's on like a cloudy day, even if it seems really kind of overcast, you still have way more power of that sunshine than you do from like your lights in your home. But you can always use that as a kind of additional light. But essentially, whether we're using light, whether we're using temperature, whether we're using our movement or eating or a combination of all of these things, we're just trying to tell the brain when it needs to be awake and when it needs to be sleeping. So this is part of the reason why people say a good night's sleep starts in the morning, is because the earlier we get the cues of waking up, the earlier in the day we get that, the more our brain will know exactly what time it is and when it should be kind of getting ready for sleep. So we want to be cueing with our circadian rhythm. We want to be cueing when it needs to be awake and alert and focused, and that also helps us with energy and focus during the day as well. And then it helps us with our sleep quality at night. So just timing your light exposure, your temperature, your movement, eating, etc., with when you want those things. So for example, when you have physical activity that you're having, the more kind of calming movements, gentle physical activity later on in the day, and then you're more kind of waking your body up as early as you can in the day. And then light, you're getting as bright light as you can, as early on in the day as you possibly can. And then the later it gets towards the evening, the less light you're trying, or as little light as possible that you're trying to get into your eyes, the later it goes on into the night. So these are the 3 different categories, and we want to be picking one action step, not one in each, but just one action step over all of these categories. And again, you can put in the comments, you can write it down for yourself, you can let me know what it was. Let's share our kind of action steps just to try and focus on a behavior that might improve our sleep quality by just one little bit. So with all of these things, you can get support from me on this. So in the description of the group itself, there's a link to mini coaching sessions with me. So it's for things like this. So if you are listening to this live and you think, you know, I really want to do this action step, but, you know, I've tried it before and I did it for a while and then, you know, forgot that I was even trying to do it, or it worked for a while and then it didn't, or I've just never been able to get myself to do it, or I don't know which action step is, you know, high priority for me, which way I should start, etc. I call them kind of I call them like friction points. So any place that you're having a little bit of friction, whether that's at work or at home, in your health or recovery, time management, boundaries, anything like that, any kind of friction points where you're realizing like either there's an emotion that you kind of have on repeat, or you have this thing that you're trying to do, this behavior, but you just can't get yourself to kind of do that thing. Any kind of friction point, conflict, etc. Things that are you're kind of noticing, you can call them like cognitive friction points, if you like, that you want someone to kind of get some support, if you want someone to give you support on that, but also perspective. So we kind of look at it, it's kind of having someone look at it from a new perspective and from the outside, so a more objective look. Because when we're in the situation ourselves, we're very kind of caught up in the like emotional experience of it, but also we're so used to our own kind of assumptions, our biases, our thoughts and beliefs about things that we can't actually see that. We're like in it. It's like the water we're swimming in, we can't actually see that. And that is what coaching can help you do. So it's just kind of getting a new perspective. And then also having that support to what can I do? What is the next kind of action step that I can take? So you guys can book those at any time. They are free. You just book a session and we do it on Zoom, and it's a half-an-hour session. If you are unsure whether what you're wanting to talk about is appropriate for these sessions, you're welcome to just message me. But anyway, those are available to you for things like this, especially if you are struggling to kind of get moving on something. I kind of think of them as like little momentum sessions. So you're welcome to book one of those with me, and let me know what your action step is going to be, and we can kind of support each other, we can hold each other accountable, and we can also kind of brainstorm these things together. So even if you want feedback on your action step, you can just even put it in the comments or DM me, and we can chat about that further. Awesome. Hope you guys have a great Sunday evening, and I will chat to you soon.